first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. The first time I came here actually was as a musician because the Center for Music and Experiment was here, and Pauline Oliveris and the gang, and it was that whole aspect of art and technology is sort of driven, and I'd say that the common ground in my thinking has not just been around people and technology, but actually, especially I've always focused as much as possible on technologies for people in the creative arts, whether it's industrial design, graphics, animation, or music. And it's partially because I think those disciplines are on the edge, and by going out on the edge with extreme cases, you actually it pushes you much faster and gives you insights to the, let's say, the mainstream. And so just for example, the capacitive multi-touch device that we made in 1984, we were just trying to make a drum. And I wanted a drum that was sensitive. It had what Apple calls 3D touch already in 1984. That's the year Macintosh came out, the year Mark Zuckerberg was born. History, context. But it was so that you could hit it with different fingers, but you could also drag your palm across to change the timbre like you would with a tabla or a Congo drum. But it's just funny how these things morph and develop a life of their own. So you might be wondering about Cracker Jack. I'll explain. It's actually a historical thing too. But I want to talk about not about what we've done, but what we haven't done and what we need to do and why it might be important and urgent. And since some of you are maybe even still thinking about thesis topics, that may be relevant. So I'm going to start with a brief history of the nature of computing. Okay, so here we go. There's three phases we're going to talk about, and each phase has associated with it a miracle. So around 1975, you started to have personal computing. This is the Altair. This thing was interesting. It had no disk drive. It had no display. You programmed it by flipping the toggle switches in the front. It had your watch has about an order of magnitude base 10 power. That's actually being conservative. And the miracle at that whole thing was that they worked and they sold. And it's hard to imagine, but when you moved way beyond that to get way, way better, we still felt we'd died and gone to heaven, despite the fact our text editors crashed every 2 minutes. And so you just automatically, every 15 seconds, hit save. But the fact you could text edit, there was still a value proposition for at least those of us stupid enough to use text editors and so on. But you never complained because you accepted that the value that you gained was worth losing the last 25 to 30 seconds of work at any time along the way, because it was totally random. It was usually when you had something. So the miracle was that it just worked, and that enough that people would buy. And that really working is a very marginal use of that word. But the second phase, I think, came with the launch of the iPhone. And the iPhone changed things in a rather dramatic way. And it's really important to figure out why it changed. And in some sense, having said that, multi-touch happened in the publication was in 85. That was the first published result. It wasn't, by the way, we didn't do the first multi-touch device. As soon as I went up and we gave the paper on this in 85, a friend named Lloyd Nakatani from Bell Labs came up and said, hey, Bill, why don't you, I think you should come and visit us. And so I went down, and a guy named Bob Boyd had done a beautiful implementation that was way better than ours, way faster, way nicer, and earlier. They just never told anybody, but if you, no, not Dean, but there were multiple people who saw it. It just, it had no impact because not very many of us knew about it. The thing about the iPhone, the miracle about that was that it flowed. In the sense of that whole I can never pronounce his name, but anyhow, the psychologist guy with a funny name, his notion of flow. But the really thing is, if you want me to tell you what I think was magic about the iPhone, was essentially it was the first digital device to have an analog interface that reached mass market. And if you think about what's that, well, digital is when you flip switches, where analog is where you caress, you stroke, you squeeze, you fondle. And it's that type of thing. And I can remember Maureen Stone, who worked with me at Park, came and visited the lab when we had all this touch stuff back in the mid-'80s. And she was very impatient with me, like, well, what are you going on? Why can't you tell me what's important, what you're doing? I'm just a musician. What the hell am I supposed to know about what you do? Because I was very intimidated by her at the time. Actually, I'm still intimidated by her. But she said, oh, it's just, you mean you're just caressing it instead of hitting it? And I said, yeah. She says, oh, okay, I get it. And then we went on. But that was really the point. But the iPhone did that beautifully, despite the fact, functionally, it didn't do anything new. There was no new applications. There's no new capabilities. And the iconography was there. But I would argue that even if it did not have multi-touch, it would have been just as successful. It had just as much impact, even if it was just single touch. And it was just the multi-touch became the prerequisite thing out of it, because that was the thing that nobody had seen before. And because we're a bunch of technological boobs, we just assumed it was the technology that did it as opposed to the human side. Because in some sense, it just felt normal. And it's the feeling, not the technology. But people didn't realize we could have done that all along. And that was the critical thing. Now, the third phase, and this is the history of the future as opposed to the history of the past, and there's an important thing I'm leaping up to around 2019. This is the future that we have to achieve, and this is about the time frame that we have to achieve it by. And this is a case where it's the manifestation of ubiquitous computing in the real sense. And the miracle here, the yet to be realized miracle, is that things work together. And they just work together seamlessly. And they just work together. They work together seamlessly, and in so doing, they reduce overall complexity. But we're not there yet. And we're not even on the path of getting there yet. And while we are fiddling with all our doodads and gadgets and apps and trying to become a millionaire by the time we're 24, making more cyber crud, which is going to accelerate. The better you make it, the faster we're going to hell. And the industry is going to crash. We're just accelerating how fast that's going to happen. We're not improving it. No matter how wonderful your application, service, or gadget is, it's just going to accelerate hitting the wall. And so therefore, this is a cry for help. This is roadrunners gone by, you can't even see him. A Wile E. Coyote is heading straight for that cliff face. And it's just like, and he's screaming for help. And this is the cry for help, this talk. So let's go back a little bit to history. So this is Mark Weiser. I worked with Mark back from about, sort of started with an 87, but certainly until 94. I was part of his team that was doing ubiquitous computing. I had a funny role at Park because I was a member of all the labs, and I just ran around. John Seeley Brown just sort of said, your job is to be in every team and move back and forth and up and down and figured out and just make connections. But Mark wrote a very important paper and taught us all a new word. And I want to emphasize the fact that almost nobody knew what ubiquitous meant when Mark first started using that term. And I'll tell you why I'm emphasizing that, because I have another term that everybody says, you can't use that, nobody knows what it means. Well, I said, well, it worked for Mark, I'm doing it. So the thing is that ubiquitous computing was this notion that computational devices are going to be everywhere. And then there was this seemingly paradoxical statement, he said, but they're also transparent. And it's important to say transparent rather than invisible. And sometimes he used the word invisible, but he didn't mean invisible. Let's put it this way. If you take your toilet out of where it is now and put it in the living room or the dining room, and took the dining room table and put it where the toilet is, people might notice, right? But if you don't do that, nobody's going to pay attention to either the toilet or to the dining room table. right? Have you ever thought about that? Nobody pays attention because they're an appropriate thing in an appropriate place, and where else would it be? And so it just doesn't matter. But notice, it's not the object that determines whether it's visible or not. It's where it's located. This is getting to the notion of ubiquity, which we're going to talk some more about. But he also used an analogy around electric motors, and you can read his paper for that. But I'll give you another example because it's by one of my heroes, i.e. the guy who designed my car. And this is an ad from 1927. It's an ad from General Electric for a refrigerator. This thing is so loaded with cultural history, and just, it's unbelievable. I love it. And I collect these things too, as well as gadgets. So look at, it's a guy in a suit lecturing women, and they're sitting there listening to him because he's in a suit, and they're women, they got the little hats on, and they're sitting down the chairs. Oh my goodness, sir, you must know all this stuff. And he's saying, and all the mechanisms in here. This thing, by the way, is called the Monitor, because it's named after the submarine from the Civil War that had that turret on it. And GE put the thing up there, and he's saying all the mechanisms in there. This is a stinking icebox like your great-great-grandparents had that is just full of germs and stuff like that, and no way to clean it, and just these shelves. And he's pointing out not the food that's cold, guess that, I thought that what fridges were for, but the motor, damn it, that's up there. So this is what we do today. So listen, how many of you live here, you probably don't have a furnace. How many people have a furnace? How many know how many BTUs it puts out? How many know, geek. How many of you know what brand it is? But those of you, okay, geek, Tom, you're, okay, he's old school. So the point is your grandparents, some of your great-grandparents, they not only knew that it had coal and the band, they knew which kind of coal, and they knew how to light it, and they had to know all those things in order to get heat. All you need to know is you put your nest or your thing there, and everything's fine. I want it hot, I want it colder, that's it. You have no idea where the heat comes from in this building. Trust me, your grandparents did. And the technology just disappears. I want cold food, I don't want a refrigerator. I want my picture hung, I don't want a hammer. Make the technology disappear. And so Raymond Loewy, in 1935, in the Sears catalog, first announced the Cold Spot 6. Now this refrigerator, what a concept. He put the motor at the back. You can't see it. It's completely invisible. He completely did a sculpted interior so that you could easily clean it and so on and so forth. He had little on the door, he had all these places where eggs would sit and all those things. He invented what today in consumer products is called whiteware. That extended to, and they extended that to washing machines, extended it to, and later on to dryers, but all of these things stopped having these angles and having all the technology. They started to have clean surfaces. It's a kitchen after all. They were white. And I love this, it's like $5. That's how long ago it was. Less than $5, you know. Can you imagine being a millionaire and when $5 to buy a fridge? It's pretty funny. Anyhow, it was sold by the Amazon of the day, namely the Sears catalog, which was a browser that happened to be made out of different material and came through a different network to the home. But it is really, really an interesting thing that revolutionized things. But it's a good example. And I'll give you the one example back to, okay, who has a car here? All right, you with the red t-shirt. How many motors does your car have?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Just, you know, come on, go. Come on, it's not a hard question. If anybody else answers this question because he's so slow, is there anybody in computer science or is there a designer here? Because they might know the answer. Someone, give me an answer. I'm not talking about motors. Okay, so I heard one. Okay, let's just go with that. Anybody who said one, if you have a hybrid, you might say two. I'm sorry, if you did less than 100, you fail. How do your windows go up and down? How does your seat go forward, backward, and change the tilt? How do your windshield wipers work? How does the pump feed the water to the windshield wiper? How does the trunk open? Etc. All those things. How does the clock work? Okay? Your car's full of motors. It's full of electric motors. By the way, how many people, if I gave you $100 right now and said, get back here in 15 minutes, go to the store, buy an electric motor, and come back here, and you can keep the change, any change you can have. Is there anybody here who you get back in half an hour with an electric motor that they bought retail at a store by itself? Not embodied, but by itself. Because your grandparents couldn't. If you go to the Sears catalog from this time, that's all you could buy, because every lathe, every drill, all the tools you had in your home, your washing machine, everything, had a separate electric motor that you bought separate, and you then had a belt that drove onto it. The farmer's tractors, all that was a motor, not electric in this case, to drive everything was driven by belts. The car is about, the ubiquitous computing is to your home and your office what electric motors are to your car and your home. They've disappeared. And what the furnace is and heat is to your home. It's just disappeared, but it doesn't mean the service is gone. It's just say you shouldn't evaluate what it is by what it looks like and what you see, feel, and touch. That's normal, that's human, but it's wrong. It's not very scientific. So we've reduced things so that's all you see. And you typically, supposedly, with these supposed learning, these things actually, I don't believe they learn a damn thing. This, from my experience with the Nest, and I don't believe it's very easy to use either. I can't use it, nor can my wife, but what do I know? But anyhow, what they did do is screw everybody else who made things who were told by their management, nobody's going to pay more than $29 for a digital thermostat, and these guys come out at 10 times that price and put everybody else out of business. And they do exactly the same thing anyhow, but they look pretty. Thank you, Apple. So let's take this from ubiquity to ubiquity. So ubiquity means basically, let's say it's everything everywhere but sort of transparent. Ubiquity, and yes, it is a word, and yes, it is in the Oxford English Dictionary. I made sure to look it up. I'm not sure how I found it, but I'm keeping it. And it basically says, it's a strong notion of place, location. Now I'm happy if you take Paul Durish's notion, Sarah Bly, when they wrote a paper about place, space, and the differences and stuff like that. I'm happy if you use either of those definitions. In fact, I encourage you to, because that conversation of what constitutes place and space, in terms of what dimensions, like social versus personal versus geographical, those all can count in terms of ubiquity. But essentially it just says the right thing at the right place at the right time for the right person, the right function in the right form at the right cost, where the cost is measured in every relevant currency, not just in terms of dollars, but for example, transaction cost, risk of error, and that type of thing. And that's really critical. But it also, and this is the key, it also has to do in terms of social place. And here is where we're going. That if there's a single message here is we have to break out of the notion of doodads, of single devices, single person objects, single purpose applications or services. I am sick and tired of having to do anything, to have to be like a frog going from lily pad to lily pad. No matter how beautiful the swamp, no matter how wonderful the lily pads, no matter what other female frogs might be around, as long as I dodge the carp and keep going, I'm still pissed off because I'm trying to do one thing, and the notion I have to jump to all these different environments, back and back and back and forth, and plan it to therefore I make mistakes and so on, as opposed to just give me what I need on the lily pad I'm on and let me get my bloody work done. And so the notion is what's around me that can all come to me and serve my purposes from where I am. And when I need to go, that I can still keep doing whatever I'm doing if I do have to move. So we'll get back to that. So if we come along, this is a little bit, my wife is kind of nuts, but she teaches me stuff, and I realize that I'm the one who's not too sharp. I'm going to give a talk. Why are you going to give a talk? Well, I'm going to talk on the 3 rules of real estate: location, location, location. You already know I like about the location. It's place. It says, oh, you're going to talk on wearable computing. No, dear. We're driving to the airport. She dropped me off. You're going to talk on location, location, location. Oh, you're going to talk on wearable computing. No, It's about location. What? Finally, it goes on like this, all the way to the airport. Finally, I say, for Christ's sake, what is it you don't understand about the rules of real estate? She says, for pity's sakes, Bill, what is it you don't understand about how to spell wearable? So I'm happy for wearable computing. And it might be wearable, but everything's about wearable computing with an H in the future. And the relationships in terms of social, kinship, and all these other things that, from the social science terms we'd use, that's what's really critical in this terms. And it comes down to this notion, it's where to fit. Where does it fit in? And how does it fit in terms of, in every sense of fit, in terms of task, in terms of other things that are around, and activities. And there's this sort of thing where you play around with this. I sort of draw a picture here and say, of A and B, who's closer to the red person? A. Really? Who's closer to A? Okay, okay, you got the game. These things could change. It changes the minute the door closes, if you can close without banging the red person. But you get the point. Who's closer to A? A to A. B or C? B. What if I told you C is A's wife? Who's closer now, right? It depends. This is the classic answer. I was talking in the workshop yesterday, right? I said the answer to any question, if I ask a question, always just say it depends. I'm an academic. But it really, those types of things there. And so, who's closer to A? You got to say D, don't you? Because it's my business partner, and we're about to go public, and it's really important. And so, then we come down to how we design things today. This knife I own. And by the way, this knife costs, this is a Swiss Army knife that cost me over $400. But I think that's what I paid for it. I know I'm pathetic. It has not one, but two socket sets. It has, it actually has a digital component with an altimeter and barometer and a clock in it. It has multiple screwdrivers and leather punches and so on and so forth. It has 70 functions, it's that wide. And it is useless. So I think there's a rule here that says usefulness varies inversely with the number of devices, but actually probably there's a power function in there somewhere as well. Because the challenge is that it can do everything. It's like the Cuisinart you got as a wedding present, which you never use, and you only have it because you got it as a wedding present, because it takes too long to set up and find out how to use it and put that away and wash it. You just have that single knife. There are places you want to use this. If you happen to be on a canoe trip and you want to anchor your canoe, that's a good way to do it. But if you did take that and you made a full list of all the tools on it, what I'd say is interesting is that there's a function, you could have a function associated with those tools, and let's pretend these are reasonable things. But notice with those functions, there is a location. And I guess the only reason you can justify putting them all is because you have this with you all the time. But the heavier, clunkier it is and the slower it is to use, the less likely I am going to have it with me all the time. So it's only going to sit in one place. So why not just have the tools where they belong? An example I used in terms of an intelligent system would be the door at the supermarket that has a 1-bit computer with its optical sensor that opens when you approach the exit. The key thing there is that it's not at the door of your safety deposit bank at the box at the bank. That door doesn't open when anybody walks out of it fully loaded with their arms full. That the supermarket door does. The intelligence in the location, the placement, and yet it's far more intelligent than most machines that have a whole lot of Bayesian stuff going on in terms of so-called machine learning. But this notion of location is really important. So I want to now talk to you about the rot. This is the rot of our society and our culture. And this is also known as the roadnet of things as opposed to the Internet of Things. But the Internet of Things is perhaps even a more rotten concept. But the thing here is we live in eburbia. And by metaphor, we can use suburbia to explain eburbia. You have all the ticky-tack houses. They are all connected. It's clear they're connected. Look, you can see the connection here. This is actually a network, and you can tell it's a network. It's a token passing network, and there are the tokens going along, and they have data in them. It's sort of the number of people that are carried. They can get into anybody's driveway. But notice, they all have their fences. The doors are all locked. The fronts, for pity's sakes, are not facing the street with a big welcome, hey, I'm home. It's a place to park the network. The driveway doors, the garage doors dominate the facade. Great architecture. It's clear in this type of place, some of us grew up in places like this, you don't know your neighbor's name, you don't know their kids, you don't know their birthdays, you don't have a key to their house, you don't do things together. This is a place where people live. This is not a community. They have no social relationship. They come in their hermetically sealed packets, they come in, and it is, by the way, exactly the relationship that my mobile phone has with my iPad and with my Microsoft computer and with my Surface Hub in my office. They know nothing about the other devices that are right beside them, even if they have the same owner on the same network. They are all connected. They're on the network. But there's no community, and there's no reasonable social relationship, and there's no sense of kinship and different degrees of kinship amongst devices, so they have their own boundaries for interaction and social interaction. And so you can talk about social computing in terms of the society of devices, the society of services, and the society of applications, and how they have kinship and knowing relationships, established relationships of sharing, community, and place. And furthermore, when it's appropriate, certain things you'll do with your kids and so on at home, which are different than you might do at school or at a public location when you're at church or whatever. Now, the part of this is that we confuse connectivity with any kind of meaningful social interaction. Suburbia at its worst, and I know I'm making a caricature of it, but suburbia at its worst is a clear indication it doesn't matter how well you're connected, it doesn't make community. And it doesn't make for social interaction, and it certainly doesn't make for graceful social interaction. And so we bring this whole thing and say, well, how is the Internet of Things, as its so-called Internet of Things, any different? And then ask yourself, what in heaven's earth else has ever been connected to the Internet other than things? And so tell me why this is a meaningful, useful, or informative term. I think most people, what they really mean is sensor networks. And even that's wrong, because it's actually sensor effector networks. It means really pathetic little things that feed up to somebody down the road, remote controls or something in some sense. But it's not meaningful. It's not helpful. It doesn't help us in any way better understand the nature of the community and how they work. It doesn't help our thinking. So let's come back and sort of say what's going on in our world. And I'd say, and this is really old, if you went home and you went out tonight and you sort of said, I heard this jerk going on and on about nothing's changed for the last 45 years in computing, technologically speaking, let's put it this way, von Neumann would recognize the architecture of the most latest Intel chip no matter what Lady Gaga did the other night. By the way, one of my best friends animated her piano, which we're very proud of because it's very cool. But yes, but it was Andy who animated it, not the Intel chip. Okay, what's changed? Things are smart. Things are smaller. They're faster. They're cheaper, and there's way more of them. Okay, they're connected. Okay, they've got sensors. They can do motion and they have different, broader range of input-output devices, or capabilities, sensors, and so on. I'll buy all of that. But in my opinion, for anybody in this room, the order in which that list comes, more or less, is the order that you are going to get from anybody, technologist, you're talking about what's been changing in the computational world. And I would say that for the human side and for the designer, that list is in exactly the wrong order of priority. That you need to flip it over so that I/O comes first, sensors, which is the same in some ways, I want to get the effectors in there, they're connected and there's more of them, and we come down here. Why didn't we get that right? We didn't get that right because it's a technocentric question, the way I phrased it. But the minute I start talking this way and point out, these things, who cares? I don't believe there's a person in this room, I don't think there's a person in this university. Actually, I don't think there's a person in this continent that if you took a neutron bomb and took all of us out, or we just all retired and went and played golf, that you would slow down by a picosecond the inevitable onslaught of things getting faster, cheaper, and smaller. That's going to happen no matter what any of us do. So why would we take time to try and affect that? That's going to happen anyhow. The question is, now that you can get that, and there's tons of them, they're really cheap, what are you going to do with them? Okay, they're connected. Okay, the connectivity becomes cheaper. But it's really, how do they interact with the physical world? That means you and the things around you. That's what matters. And then it has to do with what are the relationships? And what can it do for you? What can we do for it? And that's why probably most of you are in the room. You may not articulate it that way, but that's certainly why I'm in the room. But the really important thing here is it's because what's really changed is who's doing what, where, when, why, how, with whom, and for how much. That's what's really changed. That's the human-centric perspective of what's gone on in the last 45 years. I helped develop a lot of the stuff that, telepresence, desktop video conference, and so on. It doesn't matter that I was doing that research, based from Park back in let's say 86, 87. Nevertheless, years after that, when my father was 90, on his 90th birthday, I still didn't believe that he was on his own computer, was launching Skype and talking to his great-grandchildren scattered across Canada. I mean, I understood it intellectually. I'd helped develop that technology. But the fact my father, at that age, had a computer amazed me, but that he actually was doing that. That's the who, what, where, when, how. When Tom or Jim or any of us started, we never saw the computer. We weren't allowed to touch it. Tom might have, but we were heroes. We were how cool we were, depending on how many boxes of punched cards we could carry to the card reader. But that wasn't the computer. That was just the I/O device. And the computers is as uninteresting as the furnace, unless you want to be a furnace repairman. And the other part that's changed dramatically, and this comes down to the who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much, is it isn't that long ago. You knew when you were allowed the phone, but you also, when you went in a house, you knew exactly where the phone was. The phone, because there was only one, was right in the hallway, close enough to be accessible from any room. It was on the main floor, and it was so that you could get to it, but when you got to it, you were in a place that was reasonably neutral so that you wouldn't disturb the people in the kitchen, the dining room, the living room. And that was it. And you knew that the television was in the living room. And if you got a second one, it went down to the rumpus room, and if you got a second phone, it went up to the parents' bedroom. And the same thing about the computer, you had the boat anchor, and it was wherever you managed to find a place to put it, because your house was never architected to have an office or any of the cabling. All that's changed. It's the who, what, where, when, why, how of all of these types of electronic devices. It comes back again to saying, wow, and all of that affects the social implications in terms of usage and expectations and the potential and the opportunities. And I went to an exhibit on architecture, and one of my heroes is Louie Kahn, who's an architect and there was a caption on one of his pieces. Actually, there's one of his buildings right down here. It's that Salk, isn't there? And oh man, I'd forgotten. So that's what I'm doing Saturday. Okay. Does anybody know the building? Yeah. It's a Salk Center, right? Yeah. If you want to know why you should listen to this guy, go see this building, and you're gonna just bow down. Thoughts exchanged by one another are not the same in one room than in another. Right? I think that's brilliant. That captures the whole essence. It's not what you're thinking. It's not what you say. It doesn't matter who you're saying with it. It's in fact the context. Something said in a bar is different than is different when you're up about to get married. If you, it's you could both say I do, but it means a very different thing. Do you want to go home? I do. Do you want to get married? I do. But it's just those two words have different meanings. But it goes on and on like that. And so the thing around this is what's changed because it's about place. It's not about a single place. And this is a really critical thing. So some of you may have been confused because my boss's boss, but my boss of bosses, I guess is the best way to say him, Satya Nadella, when he became our CEO of Microsoft, he said, our whole thing is cloud first, mobile first. And so the first thing was, what the hell? How do two things be first? It's a tie. I'm a twin, I kind of understand that. But, and so I sent him a note. And I said, Satya, I know what you're talking about. But when you say mobile first, people are going to say, oh, this comes first and the cloud comes first. And that just doesn't parse. But I know that's not what you mean, because we've talked about it. And so every time you say cloud first, mobile first, you have to add the phrase, and when I say mobile, I mean the mobility of the human activity, not a device. And that what we call a mobile phone, but also the wearables, the stuff that's embedded in the environment, whether it's your environment or neutral environment or your car or a shopping place or any other place, all of those technologies should be used to best advantage to support your activity as you move through it, as you move through that ecosystem of technologies. And so my phone may be working alone by itself. When I get in my car, all of a sudden the phone pairs with the car and you get this aggregation that creates something that's very different than the car by itself or the phone by themselves. They both have their own lives, but together they aren't two separate things. They become one. And you cannot separate one from the other where they are, because it's not about the object. But we'll talk about that some more. So what you wear is dynamic. Where you are is dynamic. All of these things are dynamic. That's the point about mobility. It's the mobility of activity, the mobility of relationships, the dynamic nature of these relationships. And that means because they are mobile, they are dynamic, it's all about the transitions. And that is where the flow of the iPhone started to happen. The transitions from A to B. We talked about, some of you were in a workshop with me yesterday, and I went on this rant. Can I tell the joke again? It's really bad. Okay, you're not allowed to answer if you were yesterday. What do Canada and transitions have in common? It's a really good joke, trust me. They're both dominated by the states. If you know what a state transition diagram is, that's hysterical. Now, I warned you. The thing is, in any planning, in anything you're doing, if you have, we design for the states. We do screenshots. We design for the home, for the car, for the living room, that. But I'm moving between them. So how do I get from the car to walking into the home, into the store, doing a financial transaction? How does that flow? It's basically the flow between doodads on the iPhone on steroids, across devices, across contexts, across all of these things. It's all about that, and that's how you make things invisible. Because we are analog devices, we do work, and the hard job is to make sure to remove the impedance mismatch between people and society and devices, is to make sure that all of it functions, responds in an analog way. And transitions are the inevitable concepts, and the importance of transactions is an inevitable consequence of this mobility. So we've got all these devices at Microsoft. If I just take what we're doing, we have these great big honking big things, 84-inch. I've got both of those. Your slates, I'm leaving out a whole bunch of things, HoloLens, which is whatever, your phone and the band. And how do you deal with all these things? You don't do it by treating them like an archipelago, a whole bunch of islands that just happen to come from a company. And you can unify them from the cloud, but you also have to have them rooted together so that they actually function. And so, and you need to treat them in a network. So let's think about this, since I'm here, and maybe this is where I first learned. Yeah, it's probably from Abby. I think she's the one who introduced me to this. We all hopefully know Piaget, and Every time you hear somebody talking about machine intelligence and stuff like that, or you hear people talking about smartphones, first of all, don't accept that. Correct that language and purge that language from yourself. If you think these things are smart, your standards for what constitutes smart are something worthy of questioning. They're less stupid, maybe, but smart, I'm sorry, no. Smart is aspirational, not a product, not a brand. But the same thing's true about intelligence. How much you can memorize, how fast you compute is not a question of intelligence. It might be they've learned some of this algorithm or something like that, but it doesn't let you drive your car in the snow. I love the definition. It's about the organism, which might in fact be a computer, an application, or a service. Its ability to adapt to a changing environment through the dual process of assimilation and accommodation. It's all about adaptation. Adaptation is a dynamic thing, which is that is the process that underlies the nature of the transitions from state to state in mobility. And the reason the ecological definition is so important in terms of intelligence is because that's the whole notion of moving through the ecosystem of technologies which are superimposed upon the ecosystem of our social environment and collective environment. And now, I know you've been waiting for this. We come to Cracker Jack. So, how many people have never eaten Cracker Jack? All right, so your homework assignment, if you're in my class tomorrow, anybody who hasn't had it, how many of you, put up your hands, how many of you, have never had Cracker Jack? How many are coming to the class tomorrow? Okay, the rest of us, bring some Cracker Jack. They're virgins, we have to help these guys out, okay? And because they're kind of like Colonel Sanders' chicken. There was a secret recipe. Now, Colonel Sanders, I don't know what the spices were. I think it's on the internet, but I don't know how to work the internet. But Cracker Jack were invented, I think it was in 1896. Yes, and if I remember correctly, it might have been 98, but I'm a grandfather, so I can't remember everything. The secret was, because a question you should ask him, because it's caramel-covered popcorn and peanuts. And the ultimate question is, why don't they all stick together? Isn't that, you've gone through life wondering that question, and I'm about to tell you that the secret was they mixed oil, vegetable oil, in with the caramels, and so that it didn't stick. I've never tried it, but so it might have some secret might be in proportions, but that's the deal. So they ate it at baseball games, and if you went to the Fenway Park or in Boston, that's what happened. Now, there's two things about Cracker Jack. So those of you who are not virgins, who are experts on Cracker Jack, there were two advertising slogans that were actually were copywritten. They got a copyright on both of them at the same time. Anybody remember either one? Yes?
There's a prize in every box.
Absolutely, that was the one. And they had prizes in them, and originally they weren't these crummy, junky things. They were actually little toy soldiers, metal things and that. And if you have them, they're worth a fortune. You probably buy his cool Corvair pickup truck with one of those toys. Okay, what's the other one? Did I tell you that the other day, or did you know that already?
Put it on all the posters.
Oh, no. Okay, well, we have proof. We have an existence proof that at least one person read the poster. Yeah. And actually, we have proof that none of the rest of you did. How come you're here? How did you find out about this thing? Okay, so the more you eat, the more you want. So here's the deal. We understand synonyms, right? And so if I was going to translate that, I could put it in German so it'll work. But let's translate it in English. We realized, and the word obviously got changed from eat to consume. But I think we can assume that, right? The more you consume, the more you want. So what happens? Because we're in the world of ubiquitous computing where things are smaller, faster, cheaper, you can have as much as you want. It's almost free because music has to be free now. Of course, music's free. Musicians don't have to make money. And there's lots of it. And it's really appealing. So we're going to keep going. And we're kids. And it's Halloween type of phenomena. I'm going to start eating. I'm getting full, but I'm going to keep eating because the more you eat, the more you want. And we've all been in that situation at times, not always with popcorn. And we keep indulging, and you keep coming, and you keep going. You're getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And at a certain point, you're really, really full. But it's the slogan's true. It's been there since 1898 or whatever. So it must be true. And what's going to happen? You're going to be sick. And it's going to, something's going to happen. You're not going to eat Cracker Jack for a really long time. And I can give you proof of how long that's going to be. It's about the same interval from the last time you had a bad mussel or an oyster at a restaurant until you had another one at a restaurant. That's about the interval, which is about the interval from the crash of 2008 in the stock market. But that's what's going to happen to the crash of the tech sector, because we have such delightful, wonderful little doodads, applications. Everybody wants to make an app, the super killer app, and get it out there and do it as soon as possible. Let's quit school and have no new ideas because we're going to be in a business. And we're going to make new gadgets, and we're going to flood the market and have more things to plug in at night for the USB chargers, and more batteries to fill up the things, and so on and so forth. We're going to have all that cool stuff, and the better those things and cheaper there are, the more I'm going to consume, the sooner I'm going to get sick of the whole damn mess. And then I'm going to stop buying. And all of us are going to be unemployed. And there's going to be no thing. Till the recession's over and we've forgotten about how horrible it was to be sick that time, and we're coming back. So why? And I've got a graph. I am a scientist. I have 4 doctorates. They're all honorary. I haven't earned a damn one. But the point is, there's this thing called the threshold of frustration, also known as the complexity barrier. Now, in the first couple generations of technology, the iPhone started bringing us, we're getting really good. Chi and UX, actually, we've learned a lot. Go back to Gaithersburg and compare what we were worrying about then to now. It's phenomenal, the progress we've made. Stuff's getting easier and easier and easier to use. More and more delightful and more value. The value's gone way up, the complexity's gone way down. We can pat ourselves in the back. But for every good news story, there's a negative side. And the negative side is this. The cumulative complexity of a bunch of simple, easy, affordable, desirable, valuable things still goes up way beyond the user's, the human being's complexity barrier. And that's what's happening. And it's going up exponentially. The combinatorics are not just linear. And so the good news is we've done our job and we're getting really good about making desirable things that are useful and so on this way and reducing complexity. So in a sense, our job's done. If you can't do that today, you shouldn't be in business. But as researchers with masters and PhDs in this space trying to think about hard problems which are as challenging and perhaps more relevant than the stuff we were dealing with in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, don't waste your time on that stuff. You don't need to figure out a better way to make a menu. You don't have to make a better mouse. We know how to do two-handed input. We don't have to do better layouts for the screens. We don't have to make a new gesture language. That's going to get done without you. There's competent people who can do that. And if they're not competent, it doesn't matter because the products won't be quite as easy to use, so that it'll slow down and give you more time to do your research. Because the better they do that job, the sooner you're out of luck if you don't get your stuff done fast. So the question is, the challenge is making the stuff work together. And what you've seen with your remote controls, this literally these are literally the remote controls in my home. Everybody in the house knows how to use every one of them. Nobody, including me, knows how to work them all together. And if you want to switch from source to source, it's just a dog's breakfast. And that is tiny talent time compared to the complexity that's about to confront us. So I believe that there are 2 rules that we should set ourselves for any project that we're doing, even as a paper prototype right up to a product. And it comes back to achieving the future the history of 2019. The first thing is every new product, application, service has to provide great experience and excellent value. It has to work, flow, and have demand and value. All the stuff that we should take for granted. That should be there. But if you can only do that, you should not make, invest in, or release the product. You're just contributing to the cyber crud that's populating the space and going to aggravate the complexity, the overall complexity, and therefore all the value is lost in that thing. You may profit, but you're paying for it somewhere else, down the road. There's no free lunch. But each must also reduce the complexity and increase the value of all the others in the ecosystem that I work with, and they it. And if you do not have a cumulative reduction in complexity as you add things, and I mean, again, not arithmetic, but geometric reduction, we've lost. And somebody's soon going to say, I was with you up until now, but you know, that's crazy talk. But it's not, because I'm a historian. I look at the world backwards, and I assume that everything's already there. Everything I'm thinking of has already been done. And so design is and always has been, as is innovation and invention, more about prospecting and sampling the given knowledge rather than inventing new knowledge. It's new insights of existing things. Mobile phone, that is my phone. That is my other car. That's not an Avanti, by the way. It has Microsoft Sync in it. It's just a Ford Escape. It's a 2010 Ford Escape. Each of those is an independent thing. When I put them together, something really fascinating happens. I pick up my phone, I toss it on the passenger seat, and I'm driving, and you text me. This woman I've never met comes on and reads the text to me. And I can dictate, and she'll repeat it back and say, do you want to send it? I'll send it, and you get your text. My hands are on the steering wheel, never touched anything else, and I'm driving along. So then I decide, okay, you're going to call me, and I'm on the phone with you. So here's the trick question, and this is the one question where it depends does not work. Where's the phone? Where's the phone? That's one of the right answers. Who cares? Where's the phone? Okay. See, this is the trap, because now I'm going to tell the professor's side of the smart-ass student. What does it depend on? That's the normal answer.
It depends on whether the future history exists.
Why aren't you in philosophy? You should be in this class. But it's certainly not there. And the question is, it's not about the phone. That's another answer. It's not about the phone. Or yes. Where's the phone? Yes. Or everywhere. Because it's about ubiquity. The point is, the phone is not embodied in any single object. It's merged together. Only about 5% of this is being used during that call. The SIM chip, the Bluetooth chip, the battery, and a little bit of logic. The microphone, the speaker, the address book, the speech synthesis is all in the car. They've merged together, and I didn't do anything. But here's the best part. When I stop the car, I turn it off. We're still in the conversation. I pick this up, and I walk out. The most amazing, wonderful, beautiful thing happens that cracks me up every time it happens. I cannot do this without smiling, because I know what's going on. Not only did 95% of the technology locally handling that call just change, 100% of the interaction language changed. Because now, touch and my eyes define the interaction language, where before, it's speech, my mouth and my ears. 100% change in interaction language. Everybody says modern or touch screens. No. If you're using the touch screen while you're driving your car, you should lose your driver's license. So I've had 100% change in interaction language, 95% change in local technology managing the call, and because of those huge inconsistencies, I have complete consistency of conversation. And I didn't have to do anything other than get out of the car and pick up my phone. That's seamless. It aggregates. I mean, it's appropriate. It behaves appropriately in terms of the location, in terms of ubiquity, and and it does all the right things. And there's an existence proof that you can, in fact, if you design it right. And by the way, I'm not saying that the Bluetooth setups and so on in cars are perfect and that they actually get as much. You could make them much better. But that's the path we're on. It gives us a trajectory. And it proves that there is no interaction language for any device or application service. There's only there's an appropriate interaction language that's appropriate to the place. And it can change like that. And if you've done it right, nobody will notice. And the thing about great design is if you are a great designer, you're never going to get famous. Nobody's going to notice you unless you're extraordinary, like Louie Kahn, because you've made it invisible. It's transparent. Nobody notices. It's like the plumbing in your house. Oh my God, what's going on? Where's the water coming and going? Unless it's broken, you have no idea. That's success. That's called success. So here we go. So we're coming up. So there's two things that have to happen to achieve what we're doing. First of all, on the technological side, you must have seamless aggregation and disaggregation of the population of technologies that are in the space, devices, services, and applications. And second of all, from the functionality place to the user, you must have graceful augmentation and degradation of what's capable when you have aggregation and disaggregation. Now, that you might assume that there's a direct correlation between aggregation and augmentation, and likewise the inverse, a direct correlation between disaggregation and degradation. Not true. That's the part where the insight lies. That the way you reduce complexity is because of the place, you know what you can throw away and disable and hide. If when you're driving your car, just think about it, you cannot play Angry Birds while you're driving your car through Bluetooth. You can't do an Excel spreadsheet. You can't compose for Word and stuff like that. Most of the functionality, when you have aggregation, most of the functionality goes away. But you don't notice because you don't want it because it's inappropriate. And the same thing, but when I aggregate, I also augment the speech capabilities and so on. Because it got more compute power and it got more things, but only for the things that are appropriate in that location. And that's how you maintain the balance of complexity that's exposed at the time. It's an adaptive system, and then it brings us right back as the ecosystem has changed and the participants in that ecosystem, social of people otherwise, are changed, the behavior changes, and that comes right back to Piaget's notion of intelligence. That is an instantiation of that intelligence and with an existence proof. And notice this is all about the transitions. And that is all about just the qualities of the transitions. And so if it's true with the car, why do you have to, if you take a picture in your DLSR, have to go home, put a USB cable in, put it up into the thing, then perhaps even transfer it to your phone to get it back up to Instagram? Why is it such a pain to hook my slate up to my phone because it doesn't have a SIM chip in it? And by the way, why the hell should it have a SIM chip in it? I don't want two damn phone accounts. I pay too much to AT&T already anyhow. And so it brings us to a couple things as we wrap up. You may not recognize that knows this person's name, but you actually know this person. This is the person you hate. They're the person that when you're getting off an airplane or a train or a bus or you're downtown that has pulled out their phone and is going along like this, and you're in a narrow sight and you want to get by and you just want to get home, and this person's like this, or you're driving and you just don't want to be that. That's the person. We don't like this person. And so the questions here are, do you know this guy? Absolutely, you know that person. Do you like this guy? No. Are you this guy? Yes. Right? You are this guy. And here's the part that I love it. Do you like the company or the brand, speaking of branding, do you like the brand of the company that forces you to be that person? And you need the capability, because for me, it's coming out of King's Cross Station and trying to get to the University College London to visit my friend Dean. And it's such a morass that I'm going like this, and I'm being that jerk. I can't look up and see St. Pancras Station. I can't pay attention. These cars are going the wrong way on each side of the street, so I always get run over. You miss everything. I can be with Tom, I can't talk to him because I'm too busy doing this. It's a foreground attentional action. I can't, and it's just, I miss everything. It's horrible. And by the way, I'm walking through part of London where I've got my beautiful, I don't have an iPhone, pretend I had an iPhone. Nobody wants to steal my phone because it's too valuable. They'll steal my iPhone. I just say, here, steal this. I'm a tourist. It's like walking through New York City. I'm not a tourist. I really want to fit in. I'm a local guy. The minute somebody clears that out and frees you from being that person and still gives you the service you're getting and gives it to you in a better way so you can talk to the person beside you, you can enjoy the society, and you don't look like a tourist, you do fit in, and you walk with confidence and alert and with no external cognitive load, you'll go to that product.
Google Glass.
Pardon?
Google Glass.
No, because we don't like glass holes. But there is a solution. And and so on. And so none of this is natural. Oh, and by the way, there is nothing you can do in the way of industrial design, interaction design on that phone that will get you away from being that person. That's the point. You cannot fix it there. You can just put lipstick on the pig. So what do you have to do? So, same scenario, just come out. Now, what does work for that person is the walking instructions on whether it's Google Maps, because I'm not actually Google, I'm on Google Maps or Bing Maps, whatever maps thing you use, you can get the walking instructions and does it. But as soon as you've done it, put your phone back in your pocket or your purse or your briefcase and start walking like a normal human being. Any one of the people crossing that crosswalk could in fact be that guy. But what the phone said is, just look around you, enjoy the environment, and since there's advertisements everywhere, I'm just going to have a little blink. And your blink is a little red dot blinking in the right-hand corner of an ad, or left-hand corner. And when you see it, walk towards that ad. And when you get close by and the ad knows you're there, it'll give you a little gesture and tell you what direction to go next and start looking. And just walk that way. And off you go. So nobody knows that that's for you. It's subtle. Think about this for a minute. Who's going to pay for this? Oh, guess what? There's ads everywhere that media agencies who own that advertising are going to pay for it in the infrastructure. They're not going to be throwing ads on your phone that charge up your thing. They're actually giving you a service, and you're looking at all the ads. This is a good example of co-opetition, because that ad space is not owned by the same agency, but it's better for all of them to share it so that they can do that because you're looking at everybody's ads instead of not. And this way, I'm not looking at any. And so the other is it emphasizes this notion of BXT. Business experience and technology. You have to have the business plan so you can get your plans implemented. I'm not advocating we do this. I'm saying this is one possibility. So let me give you another possibility that says how we can do it. By the way, that's the guy. This is a friend of mine, Kirsty. She lives in the UK. She's blind. She's been blind since she was 20. She's got this set of headphones on. Now these headphones are interesting because they're quasi bone conduction headphones. They do not obscure her ears because if you're blind, your ears are your eyes. And what we've done on the back is we've mounted an IMU, which is basically basic accelerometer, gyro, and compass, etc. And it talks with Bluetooth to her phone, which is she never has to touch. And what we do is we've put her in front of a Kinect and just spun around and got a 3D model of her head, and from that we extracted what are called HRTS, which head-related transfer functions, so that we can put sound outside of her head. When you listen to sound with headphones, the sounds appear between your ears, not outside your head. But because we can sense her head turning, we can keep the sound stationary. So now they told me I'm not allowed to use I shouldn't use the term Pied Piper, but it's kind of like the Pied Piper. She's like the kids following the Pied Piper. Just follow the sound to where you're going. Except the Pied Piper has this dark side because she took the kids out of town and they all disappeared. But you don't want the blind people to disappear. You just want to make them feel normal. And so the sound can do that. And furthermore, when you go by, if you want, you can just, in speech, say, what's ahead of me, or what's around me, or where's the closest coffee shop? And so you can just go. Now, I want you to understand something. The 98% of the blind people who are fully blind in the UK never leave home alone, ever. They are not independent travelers. That's how many independent travelers are. And by the way, that's exactly the same percentage that are unemployed. And of the people you see in the States here, when they're walking around, by the way, if they have a long cane, they're totally blind. If it's medium length, they have some vision. If it's short, they have fairly, they can make out shapes, but they can function. So the length of the cane is a degree of the disability. If you have a guide dog, it's less clear. But this does not replace the guide dog. It does not replace the cane. But what I can tell you is that for anybody who is an independent traveler with a cane, they might know at most 8 routes. And it takes up to 3 months, 2 hours a session, at least 2 to 3 sessions a week, up to 6 weeks to, sorry, that's not 3 months, but it's 6 to 8 weeks to learn a route. And it takes a trained mobility instructor to walk with you to teach you that route and to help you plan that route. And then that's it. You can never go for a walk. You can never just stroll along. You can never get off the bus just to go someplace. Okay, now, and you're unemployed, except for these few who are independent travelers, and one of their routes is to get to work, and damn it, now you don't want to waste one of your 8 on that. With that, within 2 years now, we've got it so that we can do the same thing, but we don't need the advertising. We can actually just have the sound. This works for blind people. But by the way, you're blind in terms of map reading and so on when you're in China, Vietnam, Thailand, Greece, the Middle East. If you can't read the maps, you can't navigate. And if you haven't read a map, you have this other problem. So all of a sudden you have this thing with something makes you look normal. They're just headphones, they're quiet. And so there's a really interesting thing. On the edge, for blind people, you have a technology that can actually go to the mainstream, and that's always the case. And that way we can sell them to them, get the economies of scale, and then give them away for free to the blind people, which is kind of cool. But you can also have other ways. But the main point about this is, by aggregating a headset with the phone up to the GPS satellite and off to the cloud and integrate things, we can now actually take somebody and plunk them down in the middle of Reading when they've never been to Reading before and say, see you as soon as you can get there to the train station, see you later. And they can get on their own without any other help to the train station on a route they've never done before. Or we can say, just go for a walk and we'll meet you here in an hour. And the same thing. That's possible by augmenting. Now the key, there's lots of issues here. They're not FDA approved and there's design that's still research. But the point is, the complexity disappears, the technology disappears. More of the right technology is less complexity and extremely more value than you could have with the phone alone. So I've now given you a few examples about how, by strange bedfellows, the lesson here is, stop trying to make things that already exist and making it better. It's like people for years, because I've been working with mice and stuff like that, don't come to me with another an improved mouse. The mouse ever since Cardinglish and Burr has been near optimal. Think about other things to fill holes in the ecosystem that when you pair, like that headset, that would actually make the technology disappear. What could you add that makes things disappear and adds value? And using the ads on the street or the headphones just for this one task, or what you saw in the car, are just examples of things that can happen. And the part about this is really interesting is, just as you go off in the extreme, like with blind people, that gives you some questions because it's really focused, your vision. Almost everyone here is smart enough to have other interests in their life. It's all probably within the area you're an expert in that you can do that. All right, so here we go. Aspiration. What if things just worked? What if they work together? What if they work together seamlessly? And what if you do so doing, the complexity went down, the value went up? For everything. That's what we need to aspire to. Those are the questions that have to drive all of our decisions. And it brings us down. This is a friend of mine, Marco, who's an amazing climber, but he's also an amazing photographer. And I just use that because I aspire to be as good as him. But the key thing here is, the challenge now is not what can we do. The challenge now is, will it work? The only thing is, take the attitude. Now that we can do anything, and we can afford to do anything, what should we do? And I'm just arguing, making another doodad isn't worthy of what you've put into it, and your training, and what you're capable of, and what we are as an industry. And it's about time we realized we're in a different world so we can get to that third stage of history, and I think it's absolutely doable. But if we don't, the consequences are going to be disastrous. Thank you very much.